Welcome to Blue Glasses Math. In this podcast, we will explore how our self-perception as math teachers and learners influences our approach to life. Whether you identify as a math enthusiast or not, this podcast is for you. Are you a teacher, a parent, school administrator, or a student? Join me as we shift our perspective on what it means to be a math person. Let's take a look. Chepina, Rumsey, and Jody, Guarino, I am so thrilled to have you here on this podcast to have a conversation with you about nurturing curiosity in math class. Specifically, the book that I have so far is, so let me back up. So you've written this beautiful book, which I love the size of it, even like holding it in my hand, it just makes me feel so like important and like smart. I don't know. So this book the title is Nurturing Math Curiosity with Learners in Grades K2. And I know that you've told me before that you have other versions of this coming out eventually.
Yeah.
Soon.
Yeah,
Awesome.
we're working. The next one is grades 3 to 5.
Amazing. So let's dive in. Actually, I have a question for you first before we dive into the book, the content of the book. So the first question I have for you is, let's talk about this. Why did you decide to start with K2 learners? I know I'm throwing a question at you that, maybe it's a quick one, but
so I can start with that. So Chepina and I had met. We had both worked on a project for illustrative math in the early days of IM. And she'd actually written a paper about argumentation that was situated in 4th grade. And I read the article and was so inspired and thought, we should use this in an upcoming professional learning that I was working on. The professional learning was for K5 teachers, and I got some pushback. And people were asking, well, how is this relevant to K2 teachers? And it really hit me that there was a belief that K2 students couldn't engage in argumentation. And at the time, there wasn't a lot written for primary students. There was a little bit of argumentation from 2nd grade and up, but really we hadn't found anything with primary students. So we thought, well, let's try some stuff and see what we can learn about what does this look like in primary grades. And Chepina and I are both work at universities and teacher education programs. And so I asked a few of my students that were graduating, any interest in doing some work and just sort of investigating with us next year. And we were really lucky. We found 3 teachers, Bethany, Christina, and Rachel, who were either in their 1st or 2nd year of teaching.
Oh no, we lost Jody. I was wondering if that was going to happen. We'll just keep rolling.
Okay.
It's all good.
Yeah, I can tell you. Oh, here she comes again.
Back. The nice thing is there's this beauty of editing, and I can edit it right out.
Sorry, I don't even know where I dropped off.
We lost you. Well, you froze for a minute, and then so you were left off where you were talking about the students that were 1st or 2nd year students. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So 3 of my students, Bethany, Rachel, and Christina, agreed to join us on this journey just to really think about what does it look like to work with argumentation in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. We had no intention of writing a book. We just were curious and wanted to learn. And we were really lucky because we got to work with them monthly for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And I got to be in their classrooms a lot and videotape. And every time I was in there, I was like, oh my gosh, kids are doing even more brilliant things. And in addition to the kids, the teachers were the way they were making sense of what was happening and the questions they were asking. And we were so inspired. And then years later thought, maybe this would be helpful for other people. So we decided to write the book. The students that were in these classrooms are now in high school. So it's been a while. It's been quite a journey, but we really learned a lot. So this book is really the story and anecdotes that we learned from them and from their students.
That's awesome. Oh, that is such a fun fact. All right. So, so these were teachers, you met them as pre-service teachers, or you met them as early career teachers? Yeah.
Yeah, they were in my teacher ed program at University of California at Irvine. And then I followed them, or they agreed to work with me in their 1st and 2nd years. They had all gotten hired at the same school, and the principal was open to it, and they were excited to continue learning and just curious also.
Amazing. And that makes it so easy on you too, all in the same school. So it's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So the book, again, Nurturing Math Curiosity, talk to me about why is it important to shine a light on nurturing curiosity?
I'm so glad you asked that. It's just so important to us. So we know that curiosity is an important part of learning. And we also know that when students get to school, they often lose some of that curiosity. I've been reading a book by Susan Engel called The Hungry Mind, The Origins of Curiosity in Childhood. And she writes that curiosity is the linchpin of intellectual achievement, and that people who are curious learn more than people who are not, and people learn more when they're curious. So, like, it's so important. We know it declines when they get to school, and we know we need to do something about it. Like, if this is important, but it goes down, like, what are we doing? What could we do differently? And so, our experience doing argumentation and really exploring this with teachers, like, we know that we can build this in and we can nurture it. And we have this opportunity to do that with our students. So we can provide tasks and space in the environment to build this in and nurture an environment where the curious children who come to us have opportunities to be curious students. Like there doesn't need to be that disconnect. So we want to nurture that for our students. We also want to nurture it in ourselves so that we can model that and we can be curious about math along with our students and about their ideas. So we just want to, like, through the book, invite teachers to be curious and explore ideas to help nurture that in their students too. So that's kind of our like, we know it's important, we know it declines, like, let's do something about it. Let's bring this back to our learning.
I love it. One thing I heard you say there that really I think is so important is the curiosity of the teacher, right? Is that so often we're handed a stack of books or a curriculum guide or whatever it is, and it's like we just dive right in and be like, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3. And we ourselves as teachers sometimes I think lose that curiosity because we're so busy thinking, okay, we're on day 172 of 180 or 100 or 2 of 180. And like, how am I going to get through all of this? And that kind of derails our curiosity because we're constantly on that train of moving. And along the way, I love that hungry mind. I wrote that down. We're sort of like, I think, getting in our own way, maybe.
Yeah. And we're not like slowing down long enough to like let that curiosity bubble up and knowing that like they bring ideas and they bring this intuitive knowledge and this curiosity. And sometimes we don't let it come out. And
When you say,
can,
when you say they, do you mean the kids or the teachers or both?
I think that the students bring so much and they're willing to talk about it, but we don't often allow that to come out. So showing teachers ways that we can let that come out and to also get the teachers to be more curious too and to be looking for patterns. And that was one thing Jody talked about, how the teachers that we did a lot of notice and wonder in the classrooms, but also with the teachers. And so they were starting to get really curious about like, I noticed this, I wonder this, like by the end of the second year, Jody and I would like be texting each other, like they're just going, like we're not even really asking questions. They just started to like be able to talk and be curious about the math and their students. Like, I think that this is there, but we need to like nurture it or reignite it. Like we need to bring curiosity really back.
Love that. I was just on a call with Kevin Dykema actually a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about being a spy in math class. I actually said it's like you're going around kind of like looking for clues and looking for ways to build on like or ways to build on the mathematics or build on the students' ideas. And it kind of aligns with that, right? It's like we're spies, we're curious, we're human beings. And I think it's bringing that human aspect back into math class, which is so important. Yeah. Awesome.
And we've paired this idea of curiosity with mathematical argumentation, which I think is mathematical argumentation can seem really like rigid and like harsh, but pairing it with curiosity and showing like curiosity is actually a really big part. Like you can't really do mathematical argumentation without being curious, and noticing and wondering, conjecturing, justifying and extending is all part of exploring with a curious mind. So we hope that it's also a way to see argumentation helps us bring that curiosity into the classroom.
Yeah, I love that. Awesome. All right. So your book, again, is the way it's designed. I love that it's there's vignettes in, do we call them vignettes in this book? Yes. Okay. So vignettes. And then what's cool is that there's parts where it's your turn, right? So it's the vignette, and then you have an opportunity to kind of think about it in for how it applies to your own classroom. And I love that. So maybe we could jump in now and talk about a part of your book or an anecdote for your book that would help the listeners understand ways to foster curiosity in math class.
Sure. So I can share an experience from a first grade classroom. Okay. Chepina and I were visiting a teacher named Michelle Sperling, and her students had done a lot of work with addition with 2-digit numbers. So they were decomposing and recomposing numbers using counting strategies, really incredible things. And we were curious how they would approach subtraction strategies. Would we see some of the same strategies? Would they think about how they work a little bit differently with subtraction than addition? So we gave students the problem, or Michelle gave the students the problem, 17 take away 8.
17 take away 8. Okay, I'm writing this down as I'm listening. Okay, 17 take away 8. Go. Okay.
And we did see quite a variety of strategies. Some students represented 17 and removed 8, either removing blocks or kind of crossing out things. Some students counted back, and a few students were doing things like representing on 10 frames. So they would use 2 10 frames, like a double 10 frame, and have 17 counters. And as they were removing 8, they would take 7 from the second 10 frame, if that makes sense. So it was the 10 frames were 10 and 7, and they'd remove 7 from the 10 frame and then go oh, I have 10, and then take 1 more. So it was almost like this really amazing strategy. And we were like, okay, are they taking away all 8? But it looked like they were taking away 7 and then 1 more. So just really thinking about whoa, something exciting is happening here. So we debriefed some of those strategies, some of the ones that were with 10 frames and different things that were kind of grappling with decomposing. And then we gave students 3 expressions to explore. It was 14 take away 5, 15 take away 6, and 15 take away 7. And we gave them expressions where the subtrahend was larger than the minuend. So noticing that okay, 7, there's more 7 ones is more than 5 ones in the ones place of the minuend. And we listened into their conversations, and it was so interesting. Some kids were like, wait a minute, there's lots of ways to make 9. And one student, all kinds of discussions. One student said, if the second number is small, you don't need to decompose. And we were like, if the second number is small, I could take that meaning the second number being the subtrahend, 15 take away 7, the 7, or was the second number even the 5 and 15? What was the student talking about?
Oh, I love that, right? Because, okay, so this is good. So this is the listening is so important, right? Because you could very easily just make a snap judgment on what the second number meant to that student.
Yeah, well, we weren't sure what it meant to us, nor what it meant.
Curious. Love it.
Listening into conversations they were having. So we were like, how are the other kids also taking this up? It was just this whoa, this is this really interesting language being used that we're like, oh, what does the student mean? And then we started wondering, well, what makes a number big or small? Would kids sort of think oh, 9 is big and 1 is small? Or were they thinking only of single? What do we even mean by that? There were so many things to explore. So we decided to investigate further, and we thought about the number 5. And we were like, so what about 5? Is 5 big or is 5 small? Chepina, do you want to share kind of what happened from there?
Yeah. So it was so interesting to hear them making sense of like big or small, and then is 5 big or small? So we were really lucky to have some space to like come back the next day. And, I was in California, and so we met after the class and we put together some problems for them. So we got curious, the students were curious, like it was just this really nice mix. So then the next day, we prepared a sheet of problems, and where we kept the minuend as 5, sort of to
for all the problems.
To play with this idea. And so we had on one column, we had ones that were like 17 minus 5, 16 minus 5. And on the other column, we had 13 minus 5, 12 minus 5, so that there was on one side, the teen number had a larger ones place than 5. And the other side, the teen number had a smaller number than 5. So we were just curious, like, how are they going to make sense and how are they going to see patterns? And we included 10 frames so that they could represent the number and cross off and make connections. So they did that, and they noticed when we came back together, it's relative. Like 5 is like sometimes it's big and sometimes it's small, and it really depends on that teen number and the ones place of that teen number. And so that conjecture that they had the previous day about like if it's big, then you can decompose, and if it's small, there were so many things that were not very precise. And that's okay, because they came to us with this brilliant idea that we can modify. And we realized we really needed to bring that precise language. So we actually brought we debated and we talked about like, should we bring that subtrahend minuend language? And we decided to bring it because that really helped us have a conversation and know which part we're talking about. So it eliminated that like this number, that number. So that was like one really big important thing. But with the language and that thinking of like relative to 5, like 5 being big or small relative to the other number, we revised them. And this is, I wrote down what we ended up with for those conjectures. So after several revisions, we had, if the subtrahend is bigger than the ones place of the minuend, decomposing is helpful. If the subtrahend...
Sorry, is this for the kid? Is this what the kids are telling you?
Yeah.
Book grade again for our listeners who blanked out. This is grade 2, right?
Grade 1.
Sorry, this is grade 1, right? You said that in the beginning. I just want to read. Okay, this is grade 1. Okay.
So if the subtrahend is bigger than the ones place of the minuend, decomposing is helpful. And if the subtrahend is smaller than the ones place of the minuend, decomposing is not needed. And so this was like, we did this as a class, like we had different, the conjectures, and then we would slowly like say, well, what do you mean by this? Let's revise that. Could we put subtrahend there instead of the phrase, So that was a class developed conjecture using their ideas and asking them, well, what word could we put in to make that more precise? Now that we have this other word, that's kind of a cool word now, subtrahend.
Yeah.
And so what we saw was that the students could not only do the procedure and make the connection to what the expression is showing and what the numbers represent, they could explore it deeply, and they were starting to understand, when is it helpful? Why does that work? How does that connect? And so they were really curious, and we were continuing to nurture that through those 4 layers of argumentation, like where at first we were noticing and wondering about examples, going beyond the individual answer to like, let's zoom out and see what characteristics do we see, like what's happening. Then they started conjecturing, generalizing to other ideas, using that precise language. then justifying using their representations, and then extending. So later, when Jody went back later in the school year, then they were doing like a number in the 20s and subtracting, and then seeing like, well, how do they take this knowledge that they co-constructed and apply it to now a number in the 20s? And so I just think this example, I'm so glad that Jody wanted to share this one, because it shows that we can go beyond even something that might seem like a procedural lesson, like just a procedure. But we got so curious about it along with the students and went so much deeper. And like, those were first graders that were talking about this.
That was, I think, really exciting too. So in all of the projects that we've worked with, we've gotten to be in classrooms a lot and over periods of time. So at least 1 year or multiple years. And I think for me, what was exciting is in some of the classrooms, like I couldn't sit there for a class period without hearing somebody say, I've got a conjecture. That's making me think. And like the kids were just naturally conjecturing about everything. And even that language, like you don't hear that often in kindergarten, well, in any classrooms, but
no,
really hearing them make sense. And as Chepina mentioned, they're trying to like apply these ideas later. I was a first grade teacher, and so I taught this content, but my kids weren't doing this. No. They weren't really generalizing and thinking about like, when does this work?
Yeah.
And we started with teen numbers, but they were taking it even so much further than that. Like, wait a minute, this bigger idea could also be applied here and here. And to me, that's what math is all about. But I learned that from kids. Like, it wasn't about that for me growing up.
Beautiful. I mean, there's so much in that whole anecdote that it's like the language that you gave them, right? So it's interesting because a lot of times, like I say, we can't start with the vocabulary. We have the students have to need the vocabulary. Mm-hmm. Once they need the vocabulary, then they'll understand the vocabulary better because they're asking for it, mm-hmm. right?
For sure. And their language in that was so fascinating because it was like the second number and is 5 big or small? Like it all came from them and their language. Mm-hmm. But exactly on that point when it was like, oh, which number do you actually mean? And here's another term we can use. And that just became part of their vernacular and their language, different mm-hmm. than like it wasn't pre-teaching vocabulary. It was more like, what are we going to call this? And how do we talk about it so that it's clear to everyone?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's amazing. And through all of this, for the teachers, like, I mean, how did the teachers respond to all of this? Or they were co-creating with you? Yeah.
They were co-creating, but I will say I got a lot of texts over the years, like, oh my gosh, look what so-and-so did. And just a lot of like positive celebrations all the time. Like, you won't believe this came up today. In the 2-year professional learning we had with the 3 teachers that we worked with, we did video clubs every month. And so they recorded their lessons and they would choose the segment that they wanted to watch with the team, short 3 to 5 second clips, or I'm sorry, 3 to 5 minute clips.
Yeah.
And it would be like, you guys have to see like what so-and-so did, or listen to what this student did. Like, I wasn't sure what to do next. Can you help me? So it really, like, they were excited about it, but they also saw this work as being part of a community, like talking to each other. And they would choose what clips. So some of them were like, let's celebrate this. And other ones were like, oh man, I'm not sure what to do. Can we talk through this? Like, and think about, what did the student mean when she said this? Or what question would you have asked? Because I wasn't sure what to do. So they became curious about about the students, but also their own practice kind of emerged from this too.
Yeah. I love that. Did you say they're called video clubs?
Yes.
You called it?
Yeah. So there's, some work. Beth Van Ness out of UC Irvine has done a lot of work with video clubs where you're videotaping and then just watching with other people segments, like not the whole video, and sort of really unpacking what happened. And it's sort of beautiful because I think about teaching as I'm in my room with my students and I don't really have anyone to talk with. And if I do, it's me sort of replaying, like, here, Chepina, let me tell you about what happened. But it's different if we can like watch the clip together to get context and make sense of it, and stop and pause and like, this is this moment. So that was a big piece of the professional learning.
That's really cool. So I'd love that you are, again, back to it's not just a curiosity for the kids, it's a curiosity for the teacher.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons you probably noticed in the book that there's like all these spaces for teachers to write. And that's part of why we wanted to do that, was to like really create a space for teacher curiosity in a slightly different setting. Like we saw that with our, with our professional learning that we did. But we were trying to think about like, how do we invite the teacher to also get curious about the math and about the student thinking and about their classroom. So yeah, that's been a thread for us throughout all of our work, is like just curiosity with the students and with the teachers.
Yeah, I had written down before we got on today, and I just need to go back to my notes because you just made me think of something that I know I'm going to botch it if I don't look at what I wrote. Oh, yes. So I feel like this book is a perfect book for like a book study or a PLC. We call them here in New Jersey. I don't know what they call them other places in the world, the professional learning community, some type of learning space where teachers come together and really dig into their practice through the math.
Yeah.
We were sort of hoping that it would be used in that way. Like, that's why we created all of the spaces for teachers to reflect. And I know both Chepina and I really believe strongly in like learning is through social interaction. So the more time that we can have to, talk with someone else about like, how are you making sense of this? Or here's what I tried. Like, that's how I appreciate learning, like when I can engage with other people. So thinking about what could we add to the book that would make that useful? Like application guides. And now we're really excited also to have a 3-5 book. So an entire elementary school staff could work on this together. But it's, specifically relevant to like, here are examples from K2 classrooms. And it does look a little bit different in 3-5 classrooms. And now we have the writing component. So being a tool that would be really useful across the school in like PLCs or learning teams.
Yeah.
And then in case somebody does have it and they're not in a group reading it, we do also have like some like, well, here's some things we've heard, or here's like, so that you can read it without being part of a group. But I think in a group could be so helpful to share out like what you've written and reflected. And yeah, we're so excited to have that other book too, so that a K2 and a 3-5 teacher could read the same chapter, which would be specific to each of them, but then they can still have conversations with each other. So building that in, I think, will be important.
It lends itself almost as a really nice tool to help with vertical articulation too. Right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners about this book and your work together, or anything else that I haven't hit?
Well, we've talked about so many things. Like, we just really, like, the brilliance of the students is what Jody and I keep coming back for, and we keep sharing because the ideas are amazing. And so we just want to keep sharing their stories on what they can do and what this looks like, because it's just so amazing to see and to hear what they're doing, what they're thinking.
Yeah, the other thing I was thinking about when we first were talking today, and you were mentioning identity and how important identity is.
Yes.
We certainly didn't enter this as we're walking in to do identity work, but we've seen huge shifts in student identity too through this work. Like, kids feel empowered and like they can do anything, and they really come to see in these classrooms each other as resources, and the way that they would lean in and listen and like, oh my gosh, so and so's conjecture, let's test it out. And so kids felt empowered, but they really saw each other. And it was like a community of assets, like just this beautiful space.
I love that. A community of assets. It's amazing.
Yeah. With, 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds, kids that I had been a kindergarten teacher, and my kids didn't always listen to each other. It was like really hard to find them all.
They're so egotistical at that age, right? They're just like all about me, 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 right?
Exactly. And then we had one situation that really shocked us and got us thinking more about identity. We were in a kindergarten classroom, and a student had made a conjecture. They were working with teen numbers, and subtracting 10 from teen numbers, like 13 take away 10, 17 take away 10. And a student was like, wait a minute, you could actually take away the whole 10. You don't have to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And they were investigating that. And they, in this classroom also, they were using 10 frames. And he was like, well, you just take away all those 10, like take away them all.
Take them all.
Yeah. And so kids were talking about it. And I was sitting next to this little boy named Diego. And he whispered to me, and he's like, look, it works for bigger numbers too. And he had written on the back of his paper 21, 22, and 23. And then he crossed them out. And he said, I thought it worked for big numbers. I think you could take away more than 110. But I asked this other student, I asked Jason, and he said no. So I guess you can't. And I was like, oh my God, like here it is, a 5-year-old that's had this brilliant thing that he's like, it also works with double-digit numbers. Like they're 5, they don't even necessarily know what 2-digit numbers are, you know, like he's really generalizing. And then he asked another student who said no. He crossed him out on his paper and was like, that kid's the authority. And we were like, oh my gosh, like what do we do here? And thinking about Diego's identity and like, oh my gosh. So really thinking more about identity and the impacts of argumentation were something we've mentioned in the book. And again, we didn't set out to do identity work, but just really thinking like, oh my gosh, what's happening in these classrooms beyond just the argumentation.
And the happy ending to that is that we did bring Diego the next day up to the front, and he shared his conjecture, and it was celebrated, and it was like, so he ended up with a feeling of, I have contributions. Even if someone says no, I can still investigate it and share it. And it might not even be a no. It might actually be true. And so just shifting who is like a mathematical knower and who's a math person and who's like, we're all have these ideas to share. We all have things to contribute. And so shifting that has been a really big part of this work, even though Jody was saying we didn't set out to study that, but that has been a huge piece. So I think it's so important you brought that up, Jody.
Yes, definitely. And you can't separate if you're talking about something like curiosity, which is such a human. I mean, we are curious beings by nature, right? So it's almost like it just becomes part of who we are. And yeah, I think that this work that you're doing is so important to help teachers. Again, full circle. It's not just about nurturing curiosity in the students. It's about nurturing curiosity with the teachers. And I see this like this connection between, like, I think you mentioned it a minute ago, Chepina, about like who is the authority or who is the, we all are, right? We all have ideas. We all have something to contribute. There's brilliance in every single contribution, even the incorrect contributions, because they're all moving us in the direction. And I think that's so important, especially now, to give every student and every teacher an opportunity to have their curiosity be nurtured.
For sure.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, all right. So if people wanted to find out more, I mean, obviously go and order this book right now. It's probably available is it available on Amazon or wherever books are sold?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll put it in the show notes too, so people have the title so they could just find it. How else could people connect with the both of you if they wanted to find out more or ask questions or maybe have you come to their school?
Yeah, we have some social media places like Blue Sky and Instagram. We also have like we have our LinkedIn sites we can give you too.
Okay.
And there's a link tree that we have that has just like lots of information. Like there's a link to YouTube channel, and there's a link to like podcasts or blog posts that we do, or resources. And in that link tree, there's also a link to the book website too. So
perfect.
Through Solution Tree. So
awesome.
Yeah, we would love to connect.
Yeah.
Yeah,
awesome.
definitely. Or as people try things, like share examples. We're always excited to engage and learn from other people who are also trying things out.
Mm-hmm.
So cool. Well, thank you again for coming and having a conversation with me on Blue Glasses Math. I really thoroughly enjoyed this. I actually wish that I had, today's Saturday, I wish I had an opportunity to go into the classroom like right now. Try all this out. But I'll have to wait. So, all right, well, have a wonderful day. And thanks again. I appreciate your time.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much
for having us.
I'm Pam Brett. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Blue Glasses Math. Please follow me wherever you get your podcasts and follow along on the conversation on Instagram. And remember, being a math person is all just a matter of perspective.